The blood-stained telegram trembled in Zara Sullivan's hands as she stumbled backward, collapsing onto the porch step of her family's modest farmhouse. Her father was dead, shot down in the dusty streets of Tucson while trying to negotiate a loan to save their struggling ranch. Arizona Territory, 1885. The air hung heavy with summer heat, and the vast landscape surrounding the Sullivan homestead seemed to swallow Zara whole as the devastating news sank in. At 22, she was now alone in the world with only the land, a few cattle, mounting debts, and the cherished quilt her mother had sewn before consumption took her 3 winters ago. "Miss Sullivan," the messenger, a young boy no older than 12, shuffled nervously. "I'm real sorry." "Your pa was a good man," Zara nodded, unable to form words as her fingers crumpled the telegram. The boy mounted his horse and disappeared down the long dirt road, leaving her to face the crushing silence of the empty ranch. Inside the house, Zara moved like a ghost through the rooms that once echoed with her parents' laughter. In her bedroom, she pulled the quilt from her bed, an intricate pattern of blue, green, and rust-colored squares that told the story of her family's journey west from Pennsylvania. Each patch held a memory: fabric from her mother's wedding dress, a piece of her father's first shirt in Arizona Territory, scraps from Zara's childhood dresses. She pressed the soft fabric to her face, inhaling the faint scent of lavender that somehow still clung to it after all this time. Her mother had spent months working on this quilt, stitching love into every seam even as illness stole her strength. "What am I supposed to do now?" Zara whispered to the empty room. The bank would come for the ranch soon. Her father had warned her before he left for Tucson that they had only weeks before foreclosure. The drought had been merciless, killing half their cattle and drying up the stream that ran through their property. Without the loan, there was no hope. Night fell and Zara sat on the porch, wrapped in her mother's quilt despite the summer heat. The vast canopy of stars offered no answers, only silent witness to her grief and fear. At dawn, she made her decision. She wouldn't wait for the bank to take everything. Her father's body would be returned on tomorrow's stagecoach. She would bury him next to her mother beneath the cottonwood tree, then she would leave. Her aunt in California had offered her a place years ago. Perhaps that offer still stood. As the morning sun climbed higher, Zara packed a small trunk with essentials. The last item she carefully folded was her mother's quilt. It would be her companion on the journey west, the only piece of home she could take with her. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. It was too early for visitors, and they rarely had any this far out. Cautiously, Zara took her father's shotgun from above the mantel and stepped onto the porch. A lone rider approached, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. As he drew closer, Zara could make out a tall man with broad shoulders, riding a magnificent chestnut stallion. He removed his hat as he approached, revealing dark hair and a weathered face. "Madam," he called, stopping a respectful distance away. "Name's Dawson Garrett." "I'm looking for Thomas Sullivan." Zara's grip tightened on the shotgun. "My father's dead," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "Killed in Tucson yesterday." The stranger Dawson closed his eyes briefly, his expression pained. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that. Tom was a good man." "You knew my father?" Dawson nodded, dismounting from his horse but keeping his distance, clearly respectful of the shotgun in her hands. "We served together in the cavalry years back. I've been away in Colorado these past few years. Just returned to Arizona and was hoping to reconnect." Something about his sincere tone made Zara lower the gun slightly. "He never mentioned you." A small smile crossed the man's face. "Tom wasn't one for talking about the war much, I reckon. May I water my horse, Miss Sullivan? It's been a long ride." Zara hesitated, then nodded. "The trough is by the barn. What's left of the water is yours to use." As Dawson led his horse to the water trough, Zara studied him carefully. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the frontier. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and he carried a revolver holstered at his hip, not unusual for a man traveling alone in the territory. "Were you in Tucson when it happened?" she asked when he returned. "No, madam. I was coming from Prescott. What happened?" Zara explained about the drought, the failing ranch, and her father's desperate journey to secure a loan. The telegram said he was shot during a bank robbery. Wrong place, wrong time. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. Her father had died trying to save a ranch she couldn't keep anyway. "I'm truly sorry," Dawson said, his blue eyes holding genuine compassion. "Is their family coming to help you?" "No, it's just me now." Zara squared her shoulders. "I'm burying him tomorrow, then heading to California." Dawson looked around the property, taking in the parched land and empty corrals. "You're giving up the ranch." "I don't have a choice. The bank will take it within the month." A thoughtful expression crossed his face. "What if you had another option?" Zara laughed bitterly. "Unless you're hiding a miracle in those saddlebags, Mr. Garrett, I don't see one." "Maybe I am." He stepped closer, his expression serious. "I've been looking to settle down somewhere. I've got savings from years working cattle drives in the mines. Enough to pay off a reasonable debt and get a ranch running again." Zara stared at him in disbelief. "You'd buy my father's ranch just like that? You haven't even seen the full property." "I knew your father, Miss Sullivan. If Tom built it, it's worth saving." His gaze was steady. "But I'm not proposing to buy you out. I'm suggesting a partnership." "A partnership?" Zara echoed, suspicion rising. She'd heard plenty about men taking advantage of women alone on the frontier. Seeming to read her thoughts, Dawson held up his hands. "A business arrangement, proper and above board. I provide the capital, you provide the land and your knowledge of it. We work together to restore it, split the profits once it's producing again." "And why would you do that, instead of just buying your own place outright?" "Good land is hard to come by, and starting from scratch is twice the work." He paused. "And I owe your father a debt I can never repay. He saved my life at Glorieta Pass." Zara studied him, searching for deception but finding only sincerity. Still, she wasn't born yesterday. "I'll need more than your word, Mr. Garrett. Of course." He reached slowly into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Here's $200 in good faith. We can ride to town tomorrow after the burial, speak to a lawyer, draw up proper papers." Zara didn't touch the money. "I don't know you, Mr. Garrett. You could be spinning tales about knowing my father." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Your father had a scar on his left forearm from a Comanche arrow. He played the fiddle but only knew 3 songs. And he won that silver pocket watch he always carried in a poker game in Santa Fe in '68. Tears pricked at Zara's eyes. Those were details only someone who truly knew Thomas Sullivan would know. "Give me until tomorrow," she said finally, "after I've laid him to rest." Dawson nodded, pocketing the money. "I'll make camp by the creek, give you your space. I can help with the burial if you'll allow it." Zara's instinct was to refuse, to maintain her independence, but the thought of digging her father's grave alone was overwhelming. "I would appreciate that," she said quietly. As Dawson returned to his horse to retrieve his bedroll, Zara went back inside, her mind whirling. Was this an answer to prayers she hadn't even voiced, or a new problem dressed as a solution? She had no way of knowing, but for the first time since receiving that telegram, a tiny flicker of hope sparked in her chest. That night, Zara slept fitfully, wrapped in her mother's quilt. Dreams of her parents mingled with visions of the ranch restored to its former glory, and of the stranger with kind eyes who had appeared like a mirage in the desert. The stagecoach arrived shortly after noon the next day, carrying a simple pine coffin. Dawson helped the driver unload it, handling the task with quiet respect. Zara stood watching, her mother's quilt clutched around her shoulders despite the scorching heat, drawing strength from its familiar weight. Together, they dug the grave beneath the cottonwood tree, working in the blistering sun. Dawson removed his shirt as they worked, revealing a torso marked with scars, evidence of a hard life on the frontier. He worked without complaint, even as sweat poured down his face and chest. When the grave was ready, Zara changed into her only black dress, a faded garment last worn at her mother's funeral. She emerged from the house to find Dawson cleaned up, his hair slicked back with water, wearing a clean shirt. "I found these growing by the creek," he said, handing her a small bunch of wildflowers, "for the grave." The simple kindness nearly broke her composure. "Thank you," she whispered. The funeral was brief but dignified. Zara read from her mother's Bible, and to her surprise, Dawson spoke a few words about her father's courage during the war. As the last shovelful of earth covered the coffin, Zara placed the wildflowers atop the mound. "Goodbye, Pa," she whispered. They stood in silence as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the landscape in gold and crimson. The quilt remained wrapped around Zara's shoulders, a shield against a world that had taken too much from her. "I'll make us some coffee," she finally said, turning toward the house. Inside, Zara moved mechanically through the familiar routine while Dawson sat at the kitchen table, respectfully quiet. When she set a steaming cup before him, he nodded his thanks. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said, sitting across from him. "If we do this, and I'm not saying I've decided yet, what would it look like? Day to day, I mean." Dawson cradled the cup in his weathered hands. "First, we'd pay off the bank. Then start rebuilding the herd, maybe diversify a bit with some crops that don't need much water. It would be hard work for both of us." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Zara said, a touch of defiance in her voice. "Never thought you were, Miss Sullivan." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Your father wouldn't have raised a daughter to shy away from what needs doing." The mention of her father sent a fresh wave of grief through her. "No, he wouldn't have." She traced the rim of her cup with her finger. "Where would you live?" "The barn has a decent loft. I've slept in worse places." Zara considered this. It was proper enough, him in the barn, her in the house. Still, tongues would wag in town if word got out that a young, unmarried woman was living alone on a ranch with a man not related to her. "People will talk," she said bluntly. Dawson shrugged. "People always do. Question is, do you care more about saving your father's legacy or about what folks might say?" Put that way, the answer seemed clear. "We'll need to be in town early tomorrow to catch the lawyer before the bank opens." Dawson's eyes widened slightly. "So you're agreeing to the partnership?" "I'm agreeing to hear the lawyer's advice and see the paperwork drawn up properly. If everything is as you've presented it, then yes." Zara met his gaze directly. "But understand this, Mr. Garrett. This is still my father's ranch, my ranch now. I won't be a silent partner." Instead of being offended, Dawson smiled. "Wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Sullivan, and please call me Dawson." "Zara," she offered in return. That night, as she lay in bed beneath her mother's quilt, Zara wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. She knew nothing about this man beyond his connection to her father. Yet something about him inspired trust, and the alternative, abandoning the ranch, was unthinkable now that another option had presented itself. "Am I doing the right thing, Ma?" She whispered to the quilt, running her fingers along the familiar stitches. As always, the quilt offered comfort but no answers. The journey to town the next morning was tense with unspoken questions. Zara wore her best dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days but was still presentable. She brought her mother's quilt along, unable to bear leaving it behind when so much uncertainty lay ahead. Hartwell, the local lawyer, was surprised but efficiently professional when they explained their proposition. He drafted an agreement that protected both parties' interests, with clauses that allowed either to buy the other out after a year if the partnership proved untenable. "This seems quite fair," Hartwell said, passing the document for them to review. "Miss Sullivan maintains ownership of the land itself, while Mr. Garrett's investment purchases him a share of the business operations and improvements, profits to be divided equally." Zara read every word carefully before signing, her hand steady despite her inner turmoil. Dawson's signature followed, his penmanship surprisingly elegant for a frontiersman. Their next stop was the bank, where the manager's eyebrows nearly disappeared into his hairline when Dawson counted out enough cash to clear the Sullivan debt entirely, with enough remaining to purchase new stock and supplies. "Well, Miss Sullivan," the banker said, clearly bemused, "it seems fortune has smiled on you after all. Please accept my condolences about your father. He was a good customer for many years." Zara barely managed a polite thank you, knowing the bank would have shown no mercy had Dawson not appeared. They would have taken everything her father had built without a second thought. As they left the bank, Dawson suggested they visit the general store to stock up on provisions. "We should also see about ordering some breeding stock," he said as they walked down the dusty main street. "Maybe check if anyone's selling good bulls." Zara nodded, still processing the morning's events. In the space of an hour, she had gone from nearly destitute to having a chance to save her home, albeit with a virtual stranger as her business partner. At the general store, they purchased flour, coffee, sugar, and other staples. Dawson added tools they would need for repairs around the ranch, consulting with Zara about what was already available and what needed replacing. "Mr. Garrett, is that really you?" A female voice interrupted their shopping. A woman in an elaborate green dress approached, her blonde hair piled fashionably atop her head. Her heavily powdered face broke into a wide smile as she placed a gloved hand on Dawson's arm. "Why, it's been ages. Last I heard you were up in Colorado making your fortune." Dawson's posture stiffened slightly, though his face remained pleasant. "Miss Loretta, good to see you looking well." "Better than well, darling. I own the Golden Slipper now." She gave him a significant look. "You should stop by tonight." "For old time's sake." Zara felt her cheeks flush as she realized what kind of establishment the Golden Slipper must be. She busied herself examining a bolt of fabric, trying to appear uninterested in the conversation. "I'm afraid I'll be heading back to the Sullivan Ranch," Dawson replied. "Miss Sullivan and I have entered a business partnership. We've got plenty of work ahead of us." Loretta's gaze shifted to Zara, assessing her worn dress and simple appearance with obvious disdain. "Business, is it? Well, when you tire of playing rancher, my door is always open." With a wink at Dawson and a dismissive glance at Zara, she sashayed away. An awkward silence fell between them as they continued gathering supplies. "Former sweetheart?" Zara finally asked, trying to sound casual. Dawson chuckled. "Hardly. Loretta's only love is money, and I never had enough of it to interest her beyond a drink or two." He hesitated. "I won't pretend I've led a saintly life, Zara. I've done my share of carousing, but that's behind me now." Zara nodded, unsure why she felt relieved. What Dawson Garrett did in his personal time was none of her concern, as long as it didn't affect their business arrangement. They returned to the ranch by mid-afternoon, the wagon loaded with supplies. As they unloaded, Zara felt a strange mix of emotions. Everything had changed so quickly. Her father's death, meeting Dawson, forming their partnership, it was dizzying. "I'll start on the north fence tomorrow," Dawson said as they finished storing the provisions. "Noticed it's got several weak spots when I rode in." "I'll help," Zara offered. "I know every inch of this ranch. I can show you what needs the most attention." Dawson nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. "I'd appreciate that. Your knowledge of the land is going to be invaluable." That evening, they shared a simple meal of beans, biscuits, and coffee. The conversation flowed more easily than Zara expected, with Dawson sharing stories of cattle drives and mining camps that made her laugh despite herself. She found herself telling him about her childhood on the ranch, the dreams she and her father had shared for expanding the property. "He wanted to plant an orchard over by the eastern slope," she said, a wistful note in her voice. "Said the terrain was perfect for apples and maybe peaches." "That's not a bad idea," Dawson mused. "Diversifying beyond cattle would give us more stability." "Us," Zara repeated softly. It was strange to think of the ranch as belonging to both of them now, even partially. As darkness fell, Dawson excused himself to the barn, leaving Zara alone with her thoughts. She wrapped herself in her mother's quilt and stepped onto the porch, gazing at the stars scattered across the velvet sky. For the first time since receiving that terrible telegram, she allowed herself to consider a future that might include not just survival, but prosperity. And perhaps, whispered a small voice in her mind, it might include more than just a business partnership with the intriguing man who had ridden into her life at her darkest hour. She quickly pushed the thought away. Such notions were dangerous and premature. Yet as she returned inside, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm of hard work and gradual progress. True to his word, Dawson proved to be a tireless worker with a keen mind for ranch operations. Together, they repaired fences, cleaned out irrigation ditches, and prepared for the arrival of new cattle. Zara found herself impressed by Dawson's knowledge and willingness to listen to her ideas. Unlike many men she had encountered, he never dismissed her suggestions or treated her as less capable because of her gender. When she proposed a more efficient method for rotating the cattle between pastures to prevent overgrazing, he adopted it without hesitation. "Your father taught you well," he commented one evening as they reviewed their progress over supper. "He always said a ranch is only as good as the mind running it," Zara replied, a sad smile touching her lips. "He wanted me to know everything he knew," Dawson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "He'd be proud of what you're doing here." As summer gave way to fall, the first real test of their partnership arrived with a sudden illness that struck the new calves. Zara awoke to Dawson's urgent knock on her door before dawn. "3 calves down with fever," he reported grimly. "If it spreads, we could lose the whole crop." Without hesitation, Zara grabbed her mother's quilt to wrap around her shoulders against the pre-dawn chill and followed him to the corral. Together, they worked tirelessly, separating the sick calves and treating them with remedies Zara's father had taught her. For 3 days and nights, they barely slept, taking turns watching over the ailing animals. On the 3rd night, as they sat side by side on a hay bale in the barn, exhaustion overcame Zara. She fell asleep, unconsciously leaning against Dawson's solid shoulder. When she woke hours later, she found herself carefully laid out on a makeshift bed of clean straw, her mother's quilt tucked around her. Dawson sat nearby, his back against the barn wall, keeping vigil over both her and the calves. "You should have woken me," she said, embarrassed. "You needed the rest." His voice was gentle in the lantern light. "The calves' fever has broken. I think we've weathered the worst of it." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you," she said softly. "I couldn't have done this alone." Something shifted in Dawson's eyes, a warmth that went beyond partnership or friendship. "Nor I," he admitted. "We make a good team, Zara Sullivan." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, until Zara broke the spell by rising to check on the calves herself. Her heart pounded with confusion. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for this man, no matter how admirable he proved to be. Their arrangement was business, nothing more. Yet as autumn deepened, Zara found herself increasingly aware of Dawson in ways that had nothing to do with ranch operations. She noticed the grace with which he moved despite his size, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he handled even the most obstinate animals. For his part, Dawson maintained a respectful distance, though Zara sometimes caught him watching her with an expression that made her cheeks warm. In town, he was unfailingly proper, always introducing her as his business partner with a tone that discouraged speculation. Still, rumors circulated. Zara overheard whispers in the general store about the convenient arrangement at the Sullivan Ranch. The banker's wife pointedly asked when she might expect a wedding announcement, only to be met with Zara's frosty silence. "Does it bother you?" Dawson asked as they rode home after one such encounter. "What they say," Zara considered the question seriously. "Less than I thought it would," she admitted. "They'll talk regardless of what we do. As long as we know the truth of our arrangement, that's what matters." Dawson nodded, but something in his expression suggested he wanted to say more. He remained silent, however, as they continued their journey home. As winter approached, they faced new challenges. A particularly harsh cold snap threatened the cattle, forcing them to work around the clock to ensure the animals had access to unfrozen water and enough feed. During one bitter night, they trudged through knee-deep snow to check on a pregnant heifer that had separated from the herd. "There she is," Dawson called over the howling wind, pointing to a dark shape huddled against a rock formation. They reached the cow just as she went into labor. In the freezing darkness, with only a lantern for light, they worked together to deliver the calf. Zara removed her mother's quilt from her shoulders and used it to dry the newborn, rubbing life into its tiny body while Dawson attended to the exhausted mother. "She's not going to make it back to the barn tonight," Zara shouted over the wind. "Not with the newborn." Dawson nodded, already gathering branches to create a windbreak. They worked quickly, constructing a makeshift shelter against the rock face. When it was done, Zara hesitated only briefly before placing her precious quilt over the calf. "Are you sure?" Dawson asked, understanding the significance of the gesture. Zara nodded. "It's what Ma would have wanted, life over memories." The snow intensified as they finished securing the animals. When they turned to make their way back to the ranch house, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. "We'll never find our way back in this," Dawson yelled, his voice barely audible above the storm. "We need shelter now." Huddled together, they returned to the crude windbreak they had built for the cattle. It offered minimal protection, but it was better than nothing. Shivering violently, Zara pressed against Dawson's side, seeking warmth. Without the quilt, the bitter cold cut through her coat like knives. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably as the temperature continued to drop. "Zara, you're freezing," Dawson said, concern evident in his voice. He removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, leaving himself in just his shirt and vest. Don't be ridiculous," she stammered. "Why, you'll freeze. I've survived worse." But even as he spoke, she could see him fighting not to shiver. Making a decision, Zara moved to where the calf lay under her mother's quilt. The newborn was sleeping peacefully, its breathing regular and strong. Carefully, she adjusted the quilt to cover only the calf, retrieving a large portion of the fabric. "We'll share," she said, returning to Dawson's side. "Both the quilt and your coat." He hesitated only briefly before nodding. They arranged themselves with their backs against the rock face, Dawson's coat spread over both of them, topped by the portion of the quilt Zara had salvaged. To conserve heat, they sat pressed tightly together, arms around each other. "Your mother's quilt," Dawson said softly. "It means a lot to you." In the intimate darkness, sheltered from the worst of the storm, Zara found herself telling him the full story of the quilt, how her mother had started it when they first moved to Arizona territory, adding pieces that told their family's story. How she had finished it even as consumption weakened her, determined to leave this legacy for her daughter. "It's all I have left of her," Zara admitted. "When Pa died, it became everything, my only connection to both of them." Dawson's arm tightened around her. "Thank you for sharing it tonight. With the calf and with me." "It feels right somehow," Zara said, surprising herself with the truth of the statement. "Ma always said the quilt was meant to give comfort. Tonight it's doing that for all of us." They fell silent, listening to the storm rage around them. Despite the cold and danger, Zara felt a strange peace in Dawson's arms, wrapped partially in her mother's quilt. It was as if the past and present had merged, offering a glimpse of a possible future. "Zara," Dawson said, his voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." Something in his tone made her heart quicken. "What is it?" "When I came to your ranch that day, it wasn't coincidence." He took a deep breath. "Your father wrote to me months ago. He knew the ranch was in trouble, knew he might not be able to save it. He asked if I would consider coming to help." Zara stiffened. "You knew he was dead when you arrived? You knew about the ranch's troubles?" "No," Dawson said quickly. "His letter reached me in Colorado, but I didn't receive it until I was already heading back to Arizona. I had no idea about his death until you told me." Zara pulled away slightly, trying to see his face in the darkness. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "At first, I wasn't sure you'd accept help if you knew your father had asked for it." "You're proud, Zara, like him," Dawson sighed. "And then, as time passed, it seemed harder to bring up." "I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry." Zara processed this revelation, emotions warring within her. Part of her felt betrayed by the omission, yet another part understood his reasoning. And beneath it all was a touch of gratitude that her father had cared enough to reach out to try to secure her future even after he was gone. "Why did my father write to you specifically?" she finally asked. Dawson was quiet for a long moment. "We were more than just war comrades, Zara. After your mother died, Tom and I corresponded regularly. He knew I was looking to settle down somewhere permanent, somewhere with meaning." His voice softened. "He wrote about you in those letters, your strength, your love for the land. I think maybe he hoped that you'd come for more than just the ranch," Zara finished quietly. "Perhaps, but I want you to know our partnership is exactly what I said it was, business. I never intended to presume anything more." he hesitated. "Though I can't deny that I've come to care for you, Zara. More than I should as just a business partner." The confession hung in the air between them, as tangible as the quilt wrapped around their shoulders. Zara's mind raced. All these months, she had been fighting her growing feelings, believing they could never be more than partners in the ranch. Now, knowing her father had perhaps intended something deeper, the possibility of more seemed suddenly real and terrifying. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't need to say anything now," Dawson assured her. "We've got a long, cold night ahead of us and bigger concerns than my feelings." His tone lightened slightly, like making sure we don't become icicles before morning. Grateful for the reprieve, Zara settled back against him, allowing herself to draw comfort from his solid presence. As the night wore on, they talked intermittently, sharing stories of their lives before meeting. Dawson told her about his childhood in Missouri, his time in the cavalry, the years he spent drifting after the war. "I never found anywhere that felt like home," he confessed. "Not until recently." Zara understood what he wasn't saying, that her father's ranch, working alongside her, had given him that sense of home he'd been seeking. The realization warmed her more than the shared body heat or the quilt around them. By the time dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white. They checked on the cow and calf, finding both alive and well thanks to their intervention. Carefully, Zara retrieved her mother's quilt, shaking off the snow and folding it with reverence. The walk back to the ranch house was arduous but beautiful, the rising sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Neither mentioned their nighttime confessions, though something had undeniably shifted between them. In the days that followed, they fell back into their working routine, though Zara found herself hyper-aware of Dawson's presence, of the glances they exchanged, the brief touches as they passed tools or worked side by side. A week after the snowstorm, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Zara was hanging laundry when she spotted a smart buggy approaching. As it drew closer, she recognized Mrs. Harrington, the banker's wife, accompanied by her daughter Frances. "Miss Sullivan," Mrs. Harrington called with forced cheer. "What a lovely day for a visit." Zara wiped her hands on her apron, puzzled by the unexpected appearance of the town's most notorious gossip. "Mrs. Harrington, Miss Frances, this is a surprise. We were just passing by on our way to visit the Wheelers, Mrs. Harrington explained, though the Wheeler ranch lay in the opposite direction. "And I thought, why not stop and see how dear Miss Sullivan is faring with her arrangement?" The emphasis on the last word made Zara bristle, but she maintained a polite facade. "Would you care for some coffee?" "I just made a fresh pot." While Zara prepared coffee, Mrs. Harrington wandered the main room of the house, her eyes cataloging every detail, no doubt for later discussion among her social circle. Frances, a pretty girl of 19, sat primly on the edge of a chair, looking uncomfortable. "I must say the ranch looks much improved," Mrs. Harrington commented. "Mr. Garrett appears to be quite industrious." "We both work hard," Zara replied evenly, setting down the coffee cups. Of course, though it must be difficult, a young woman alone with a single gentleman." Mrs. Harrington's tone was sympathetic, but her eyes gleamed with curiosity. "People do talk, my dear." Before Zara could respond, the door opened and Dawson entered, stopping short at the sight of the visitors. He had clearly come from working in the barn, his shirt damp with sweat, his hair tousled. "Pardon me, ladies," he said, removing his hat. "I didn't realize we had company." Frances Harrington's cheeks turned pink as her eyes lingered on Dawson's broad shoulders. Mrs. Harrington, noticing her daughter's reaction, suddenly looked speculative. "Mr. Garrett, how lovely to meet you properly. I'm Mrs. Harrington, and this is my daughter Frances." She practically pushed the girl forward. "Frances is quite accomplished piano, embroidery, and she makes the most delicious apple pies." Dawson glanced at Zara, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Is that so? Well, we're planning an apple orchard here at the ranch. Perhaps Miss Frances could advise us on the best varieties for pie making." Frances giggled nervously while her mother beamed. "Oh, Frances would be delighted. Perhaps you could ride into town for Sunday dinner this weekend." "We would so love to have you both." "That's very kind," Dawson said diplomatically, "but we've got cattle arriving on Sunday, perhaps another time." The disappointment on Mrs. Harrington's face was almost comical. She quickly rallied, engaging Dawson in conversation that transparently highlighted her daughter's virtues while simultaneously casting subtle aspersions on the propriety of his living arrangement with Zara. Throughout the exchange, Dawson remained polite but distant, never taking the bait misses. Harrington dangled before him. When the visitors finally departed, Zara and Dawson stood on the porch watching the buggy disappear down the road. "Well," Zara said with a sigh, "that was interesting." Dawson chuckled. "I believe I've just been inspected as potential husband material for Miss Frances." "And did you pass inspection?" Zara kept her tone light, though she was surprised by the twinge of jealousy she felt. "I doubt it. Mrs. Harrington seemed to find my current living situation rather scandalous." He glanced at her, his expression turning serious. "Does it bother you, what people are saying?" Zara considered the question, looking out over the ranch, their ranch now. In the month since Dawson's arrival, the change was remarkable. Fences stood strong, cattle grazed in pastures that had been empty, and plans for expansion were underway. More than that, the crushing loneliness that had threatened to consume her after her father's death had receded, replaced by purpose and companionship. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't bother me, not anymore." Dawson studied her face, seeming to search for something. "Mrs. Harrington isn't entirely wrong, you know. Our arrangement is unusual." "The whole territory is unusual, Dawson. Women doing men's work, people from all walks of life trying to make something of themselves." Zara met his gaze directly. "We're building something worthwhile here. I won't apologize for that." A slow smile spread across his face. "No, and you shouldn't." He hesitated, then added, "Though I've been thinking, there might be a way to silence the gossips for good if you were interested." Zara's heart skipped a beat as she understood his implication. "Are you proposing a different kind of partnership, Mr. Garrett? I'm considering it." His eyes never left hers. Would such a proposal be unwelcome? The directness of the question took her breath away. Since their night in the snowstorm, they had carefully avoided discussing the feelings they had confessed. Now, with the subject broached again, Zara found herself at a crossroads. "It would not be unwelcome," she said softly, "but I would hope it would be offered for reasons beyond silencing gossip." Dawson stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Zara Sullivan, in all my years of wandering, I've never met anyone like you. Your strength, your determination, your heart, they humble me. I came here looking for a place to belong, and I found so much more." He took her hand gently in his. "I'm not proposing today. When I do, I want you to be certain of my feelings and your own. But I wanted you to know that's where my thoughts have been heading." Zara felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "I appreciate your honesty and your patience. Some things are worth waiting for," he said simply. That evening, as Zara sat on the porch mending a tear in her mother's quilt, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been facing the loss of everything she held dear. Now the ranch was thriving, and she found herself contemplating a future she had never imagined possible. She ran her fingers over the familiar patches of the quilt, each one a memory, a piece of her family's story. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine adding new patches, continuing the story with Dawson at her side. The winter passed with its own rhythm of challenges and quiet moments. Zara and Dawson worked side by side, their partnership deepening in ways both professional and personal. They began taking their evening meals together in the ranch house, sharing the day's events and making plans for the spring. Sometimes, when the work was done, they would sit before the fire while Zara sewed and Dawson read aloud from one of her father's books. In these domestic scenes, Zara found herself imagining a future where such evenings weren't temporary but permanent. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. She had been independent for so long, responsible only for herself. Marriage would change everything. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch flourished under their joint care. The cattle birthed healthy calves, the first seedlings for the new orchard arrived, and they hired 2 young cowboys to help with the expanding operations. On a mild April morning, Dawson approached Zara as she worked in the vegetable garden she had started near the house. "I need to ride into Tucson," he said. "The bank there has approved our loan for the additional acreage to the east." Zara looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. "That's wonderful news. When will you go?" "I thought I'd leave tomorrow, be gone about a week." He hesitated. "Unless you'd like to come along, the boys can handle things here for a few days." The invitation surprised her. They had rarely been apart since forming their partnership, but neither had they traveled together beyond their local town. "Tucson," she repeated softly. She hadn't been back since her father's death. Understanding dawned in Dawson's eyes. "We could visit his grave if you'd like." "Pay our respects," Zara nodded, touched by his consideration. "Yes, I think I'd like that, to see where he rests and to tell him how we've saved the ranch." The journey to Tucson took 2 days by wagon. They traveled at an easy pace, enjoying the changing landscape and each other's company away from the constant demands of the ranch. At night, they camped under the stars, maintaining a proper distance between their bedrolls, though Zara found herself increasingly aware of Dawson's presence just feet away. Tucson was larger and busier than Zara remembered, the streets crowded with wagons, horses, and people from all walks of life. After securing rooms at a respectable hotel, they visited the bank to finalize the loan arrangements. The banker was clearly impressed by the progress they had made with the Sullivan Ranch in less than a year. "You two have accomplished quite a feat," he commented as they signed the paperwork. "Most new ranching ventures struggle for years before showing such returns." "We work well together," Dawson replied, glancing at Zara with a warmth that made her cheeks flush. After concluding their business, they visited her father's grave in the small cemetery on the outskirts of town. Zara had brought fresh wildflowers, which she placed carefully at the base of the simple marker. She had also brought her mother's quilt, wrapped protectively in oilcloth for the journey. As they stood before the grave, Zara unfolded the quilt and held it to her chest. "I brought this, Pa," she said softly, "to show you it's still with me, just like you and Ma are." She glanced at Dawson. "And to tell you that the ranch is thriving. We've saved it, Pa. It's going to be everything you dreamed." Dawson stood respectfully at her side, his hat in his hands. "Your daughter is a remarkable woman, Tom," he said. "I wish you could see the way she's fought for your legacy. You'd be proud." Tears stung Zara's eyes at his words. She reached out and took his hand, a public gesture she would never have made months ago. Together, they stood in silent communion with the man who had, knowingly or not, brought them together. That evening, Dawson surprised her by suggesting they dine at the finest restaurant in Tucson. Zara hesitated, aware that her best dress was hardly suitable for such an establishment, but Dawson had anticipated this. "I took the liberty of arranging something," he said, presenting her with a package. "Consider it a celebration of our successful business expansion." Inside the package, Zara found a beautiful dress of deep blue silk, simple enough to be respectable but elegant enough for a fine dinner. Accompanying it was a matching shawl of delicate lace. "Dawson, I can't accept this," she protested. "It's too extravagant, please," he said gently. "You've worked harder than anyone I know this past year. Allow yourself one evening of indulgence." Unable to resist the sincerity in his eyes, Zara accepted the gift. In her hotel room, she dressed carefully, arranging her hair in a more sophisticated style than her usual practical braid. The woman who looked back at her from the mirror was a stranger elegant, poised, and undeniably feminine in a way her daily life rarely allowed. When she descended to the hotel lobby, Dawson was waiting, dressed in a new suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. His eyes widened at the sight of her, a look of such open admiration on his face that Zara felt herself blushing like a schoolgirl. "You are beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The restaurant was indeed grand, with crystal chandeliers and linen tablecloths. Heads turned as they were escorted to their table, and Zara was acutely aware of the speculative glances cast their way. For once, she didn't mind the attention. Over a meal more elaborate than anything Zara had eaten in years, they talked of everything and nothing, memories of their childhoods, dreams for the ranch's future, amusing stories of their early days working together. As dessert was served, Dawson's expression grew more serious. "Zara, there's something I'd like to discuss with you." The formality in his tone made her pulse quicken. "Yes, our partnership agreement includes a clause allowing either of us to buy the other out after 1 year." He met her gaze directly. "That year is almost up." Zara felt a chill of apprehension. Was he planning to leave? Had she misread everything between them? "Are you thinking of exercising that option?" she asked carefully, in a manner of speaking. Dawson reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box which he placed on the table between them. "I'm proposing a renegotiation of terms, a lifetime partnership, not just in business but in life." Zara stared at the box, her heart pounding. "Dawson, I love you, Zara Sullivan. I think I have since that first day when you stood on your porch with a shotgun, defending what was yours." He smiled at the memory. "I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love the way you talk to the calves when you think no one is listening, and the way you frown when you're concentrating on the account books." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect pearl. "This was my mother's. I've carried it for years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." He took a deep breath. "Zara Sullivan, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Time seemed to stand still as Zara looked from the ring to the man before her. In his eyes, she saw everything she had come to cherish: respect, understanding, partnership, and love. He had come into her life when all seemed lost and had helped her rebuild not just the ranch but her sense of hope for the future. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Dawson Garrett. I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. Around them, other diners who had noticed the romantic tableau broke into spontaneous applause, but Zara barely heard them. In that moment, there was only Dawson and the promise of a shared future. They were married 2 days later in Tucson's small church, with only a handful of witnesses, the hotel proprietor and his wife, who had been charmed by their romance, and the young bank clerk who had processed their loan. Zara wore her blue silk dress and carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers. Dawson wore his new suit, his face solemn yet radiant with happiness. For her, something old, Zara had brought a small piece of her mother's quilt, which she had carefully cut and fashioned into a handkerchief. As they exchanged vows, she held it tightly, feeling as though her parents were somehow present, blessing this new chapter in her life. The journey back to the ranch was different than the journey to Tucson had been. No longer constrained by propriety, they shared a bedroll beneath the stars, discovering each other with tenderness and passion. Wrapped in her mother's quilt, Zara found a new kind of sanctuary in Dawson's arms, not replacing what the quilt had always meant to her, but adding to its story, its legacy. "I understand now why this quilt means so much to you," Dawson said one night, tracing the intricate stitching with his finger. "It's not just fabric and thread, it's a piece of your history, your family." Zara nodded, resting her head on his chest. "And now it's part of our story too." When they returned to the ranch, the cowboys they had hired greeted them with knowing grins but respectful congratulations. Word of their marriage had somehow preceded them, and several neighboring ranchers rode over in the following days to offer their good wishes. Mrs. Harrington also paid a visit, her demeanor a mix of disappointment at losing Dawson as a potential son-in-law and excitement at being among the first to witness the new arrangement. She departed with enough gossip to fuel her social circle for months, though for once the talk would be of a proper marriage rather than a scandalous partnership. Life settled into a new rhythm. Dawson moved from the barn loft to the main house, and together they made plans for expanding the ranch house to accommodate the family they hoped to have. The orchard was planted, the herd continued to grow, and by their first anniversary, the Sullivan Garrett Ranch, as it was now known, was recognized as one of the most promising operations in the territory. On the evening of that anniversary, Dawson presented Zara with a gift, a new section for her mother's quilt. expertly crafted by the seamstress in town under his direction. The patch depicted their ranch house with the mountains behind it, and stitched along the border were the words, "Two lives joined as one." "To add to your family's story," he explained as Zara ran her fingers over the beautiful handiwork. That night, wrapped in the expanded quilt that now told not just the story of her past but of her present and future, Zara shared her own news with Dawson. "I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently over her stomach. "Our family is growing. The baby should arrive by winter." The joy that illuminated Dawson's face was a sight Zara knew she would treasure forever. As he gathered her into his arms, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from grief to partnership to love. The quilt that had once represented all she had left of her family now symbolized all that she had gained. It had comforted her in her darkest hour, had sheltered a newborn calf during a blizzard, and had wrapped around her and Dawson on the night they first acknowledged their feelings for each other. Now, as they celebrated the life they had built together and the new life growing within her, Zara knew with certainty that her mother would approve of how her cherished creation was being used to embrace new beginnings, to connect past and future, to shelter love in all its forms. 3 years later, on a perfect autumn evening, Zara sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, her mother's quilt now considerably larger with the addition of patches celebrating their marriage, and the birth of their son Thomas wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. Beside her, Dawson held their sleeping son while their daughter Clara, just 6 months old, nursed contentedly at Zara's breast. The ranch had flourished beyond their most ambitious dreams. The apple orchard was bearing fruit, the cattle herd had tripled in size, and they now employed a full complement of ranch hands. The original Sullivan homestead had grown into a prosperous enterprise that was the pride of the region. "What are you thinking about?" Dawson asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Zara smiled, looking out over the land they had nurtured together. "I was remembering that day you rode up to the ranch, how close I came to sending you away with a shotgun blast over your head," Dawson chuckled. "I'm grateful for your restraint." "And I'm grateful for your persistence." She adjusted the quilt around her shoulders. "When my father died, I thought I'd lost everything. I never imagined that by holding onto this quilt, this piece of my past, I'd find my future." Dawson leaned over and kissed her gently. "Your father knew what he was doing when he wrote to me. He couldn't have known how it would unfold, but he hoped we might build something together." "We've built more than a ranch," Zara said, glancing at their children. "We've built a legacy." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Zara Sullivan Garrett thanked the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. The quilt that had once been her sole comfort now wrapped around a family that had grown from grief and determination into love and prosperity. And as Dawson shifted closer, drawing both her and their children into his embrace, Zara knew that the quilt her mother had sewn with such love would continue to grow. Patch by patch, generation by generation, a tapestry of lives intertwined, of hardships overcome, of love that had flourished in the most unexpected of circumstances. In the gathering darkness, with the sounds of their thriving ranch surrounding them and the warmth of family enveloping her, Zara finally understood what her mother had meant when she said the quilt would keep her safe. It wasn't just the fabric itself, but what it represented: continuity, resilience, and the enduring power of love to transform even the deepest loss into something beautiful.